Perfect. We are all set. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, and dear friends, welcome to Berlin on this beautiful sunny day. What a privilege it is to look out at this room, interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and intercultural. I'm Dilem Kaya, and I'm your moderator for the next 2 exciting days. Welcome. Welcome to Shaping AI, Ethics, Power, and Responsibility. We gather here at a remarkable moment. AI is rapidly moving from a technological innovation to a force that shapes institutions, political systems, economies, and most importantly, our own personal lives. What AI can do, we already know, we see, and we listen to it in the news. But what AI should do is a question that does not get the right attention that it should. This is why we are all, you and me, gathered here at this beautiful venue in Berlin, not only in person, but also online, to actually ask those rather not that easy but highly relevant questions on whose knowledge counts when using AI, who benefits, and who gets to shape the rules. Notably, our conversation today does not start with this conference. This conference is a culmination of several workshops that took place already internationally. And when I look in the room, some of the contributors are also sitting here in the room or also joining online. Thus, I'm looking very forward to have your knowledge here, but to have a lot of curious minds sitting here to actually not only discuss, but work in groups to shape what's next in AI, and it's going to be responsibly. So today, we start with opening keynotes, followed by an important panel on AI sovereignty, and then directly dive into our exciting 4 different parallel workshops. At the end, we have an evening reception starting at 7. Tomorrow, we go again further with the second set of workshops, where we then ask prospective questions and then end with a closing discussion, of course not a closing discussion on this topic, but just closing of the conference, on where we can head and should head. And I hope this conversation doesn't only stand in those 2 days, but we can then also enhance on this later internationally. So, why do we gather here in Germany? Not as a benchmark, of course, but not that we do it everything correctly, but because those questions of democracy, of participation, of discrimination are deeply rooted in public life and civic discourse. So throughout those 2 days, I hope that we all engage with your curiosity, openness, and respect for different perspectives. Thus, with no further ado, I would now like to welcome 2 of the representatives of these 2 institutions that made this conference also possible. First, I want to introduce Peggy Piesche onto the stage. She is representative of the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, in German. In English it's called Federal Agency for Civic Education. Her work is pretty outstanding. She sits on numerous advisory boards focused on anti-racism, equality, and the rights of people of African descent. Now, Peggy, please join me on stage.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And yes, welcome to all of you. I would like to begin by welcoming everybody who made it today to Berlin for these 2 days. A particular welcome to our international guests who have traveled from Brazil, South Africa, India, and South Korea. Your presence here is not just a courtesy, it is the condition of possibility for this conference. Therefore, a really special welcome also to our keynote speaker, Dr. Sita Pina Gangadharan. Welcome to you. And of course, also very welcome to Professor Dr. Gesche Joost, President of the Goethe-Institut, our partner of this project, and to the German experts and practitioners who have joined us across the 4 workshop groups. And of course, welcome to everybody who registers for the conference and is here as part of our broader community of practice. And this is also extended to the people of Zoom, so to speak, in the live streaming. On behalf of the Federal Agency of Civic Education, I'm very delighted to say some words in the beginning of this conference. The Federal Agency of Civic Education was founded in 1952 in direct response to the experience of National Socialism. Its founding conviction was that oppression does not just begin with actual violence, but with words, opinions, and ideology, and that democracy must therefore be actively learned, lived, debated, and protected. That mandate has not become less important over the time. In contrary, it has become more urgent. And that especially in light of the imminent development of technology. Today, the questions we must ask about democracy are inseparable from the questions about digital technology. Who builds the systems that shape what we see, what we know, what opportunities we have access to? whose experiences are reflected in those systems and whose are not. These are not just technical questions, they are ethical and, for that matter, political questions. And they are questions for civic education because they concern the very foundational question: how do we want to live together in the future? Within the federal agency, the department I lead focusing on civic education for and with diverse communities in Germany, with a particular emphasis on questions of participation, representation, and equality. All of that always in the context of anti-discrimination and the urge of critical power and race analysis. Part of that work addresses digitalization, not as a neutral process of modernization, but as a field that raises urgent questions about whose experiences shape technological systems, whose perspectives inform how they are designed, and what civic education must do to remain relevant in a society being fundamentally reshaped by these technologies. For us, this means taking seriously that artificial intelligence is not developed in a vacuum. It's reflected the social structures, power relations, and knowledge hierarchies of the context in which it is built. Discrimination is not a technical problem to be solved with better algorithms. It is a structural condition that requires structural responses. Thus, anti-racist and intersectional perspectives are not additions to this work, they are its foundation. That is also why the international dimension of this project is not a bonus, but it is essential. We cannot understand what AI does and what it could do differently from a single vantage point. The Goethe-Institut brought something to this project that the federal agency could not have built alone. A genuine network of partners in Brazil, in South Africa, in India, and South Korea, and relationships of trust that made it possible to have conversations that go beyond the familiar frame. What emerged from those regional workshops was not a confirmation of what we already knew. It was a genuine expansion of the question we are now able to ask. This conference could not have been possible without the commitment and care of many people. I want to thank the colleagues of the Goethe-Institut in Munich, the central office, and the regional offices across the 4 countries for the trust and collaboration that made this project possible. And within the Federal Agency of Civic Education, I want to thank my colleagues without whom this conference simply could not have been happen. First and foremost, Francesca Schmidt, who organized this and is the brain behind it, but also Theresa Müller, Sandra Billstein, Elmar Jentges-Ferreira, and Wolfgang Würz, whose work behind the scenes made everything you see today possible. With that, I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Dr. Gesche Joost, President of the Goethe-Institut, and without whose partnership this project would not exist. Thank you so much.
Super. Thank you so much, dear Peggy, for the kind words and also for these words that are very, very important on our collaboration and on these topics. So, dear Peggy, dear colleagues of the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, of the Goethe-Institut, and very much dear experts from so many parts of the world, from Brazil, India, from South Africa, South Korea, and also from Germany. Welcome to Berlin. Thank you so much for having me. I was super impressed by the program that I saw. And I'm sorry I will have to leave after an hour or so, but I really envy you to be able to spend 2 days on these kind of important topics. And I'm sure you will have very important answers, for example, to the question of how to deal with digital sovereignty, so I expect the answer for that one. And I guess also that you will have the definite answer why Donald Trump was shutting down the Anthropic 2 large language models kind of yesterday. So I guess you will come behind what's the reason for that. So this will be for Tuesday evening, maybe the announcement that you can make. Despite from that, I think that you really hit the point in the topics that you are talking about. And I'm not only the president of the Goethe-Institut, but I'm also a professor here in Berlin at the University of the Arts, and I run a research group on very similar topics, so dealing with digital sovereignty from other parts of the world, the non-Western perspectives, and I run a research group also at the Institute for the Connected and Networked Society. So that's also my second hat and maybe the most important hat for this kind of conversation. So what I want to start with is one example from my research. So do you remember the debate over the Venus of Willendorf back in 2017? You might remember this is this 11 centimeters tall female figurine carved from limestone some 30,000 years ago. So a very tiny little female statue. And the image of this statue, so a female body, this figurine was banned from Facebook for obscene nudity. And this is one of the earliest pieces of art from Stone Age, a naked woman with exaggerated breasts, belly, and hips. Because of these features, she's often associated with fertility and femininity, and according to Facebook, with obscenity. And that was nearly 10 years ago. Generative AI or agentic AI was still a long way off, and yet this early debate foreshadowed what was to come in the years ahead. A heated debate about which biases are reproduced online, which bodies are classified as obscene, and why it is specifically the female body, but also queer, disabled, fat, aging, or bodies of people of color that are marked as suspect. Corinna Canali has been working on this topic in my research group at the Weizenbaum Institute over the last few years. And she poses critical questions about the power structures of major platforms and this incidence, what they reveal. So questions are, as Peggy was also raising, so who determines the narratives of these technologies? Who sets their rules? And who is excluded and marginalized? It becomes clear once again that the global north, particularly the US, but also China, determines the tech platforms and their rules. And do you remember that in the 1990s, the dominant and promising idea was that the internet itself would make everything fairer, easier, make global knowledge more accessible, would create a space of pure democracy through technology as such. And I also kind of believed it. You know, I was a student. I thought like, wow, there's this new thing, the internet, that's going to be really cool and great and more equal. But yeah, today we know that this was incredibly naive. The age of AI builds on this idea and continues to tell us that AI makes our lives easier, faster, lets us concentrate on the fun side of things, but this is just not true. And I think that this is going to be one of the debating points for the next 2 days. We know about the extractivist nature of AI and know about the new digital colonialism. Kate Crawford published the excellent book Atlas of AI back in 2021, where she depicts the material basis for this shiny digital age. From scarce materials like cobalt that is extracted from Congo, to invisible labor that is done by low-paid human agents on the Philippines who have to train the algorithms on what should be banned as obscene, like the Venus of Willendorf, like the female body as such, as well as child pornography. You all know about this critical view on AI, its power structures and ecologies. That's what your project is about. And when I learned about this project, Shaping AI Ethics, Power and Responsibility, this great collaboration between the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung and the Goethe-Institut, spanning its scope around 5 different countries, I was deeply impressed. It is exactly what we currently need to investigate, perspectives from different parts of the world, from different communities and interests who are usually marginalized and neglected. And this is exactly the danger in the current state of tech, that the world is more and more flattened through AI. What do I mean by flattened? I mean that it is streamlined with flat aesthetics, with a predominant language, with a normalized of the good citizen who is male, white, and able-bodied, not poor, who is working in a proper office, and so on. And it is not intended by technology as such, because I believe technology itself is always neutral, but it is due to its DNA, its basic functional principles being based on likelihood, basierend auf Wahrscheinlichkeit, on probability, on the logics of the masses. As long as there are these predominant patterns in the training data and on the internet as such, we see these outputs. Garbage in, garbage out. Therefore, it is excellent that your debates were cycling around the different layers of racism, bias, hegemony in AI, seeing it as an apparatus of power. It is time for action now. With our network of 154 Goethe-Instituts in 100 countries around the world, we are able to connect these local experiences and create spaces like this program for more inclusive and globally informed debates on the societal and cultural impact of AI. It is so important to learn from each other and bring together the different perspectives from around the world, especially here in Germany and Europe. In one example, I was recently invited to our Goethe-Institut in Sao Paulo, and we had a great panel discussion on digital sovereignty, with a strong perspective from Latin America, learning from their internet governance approaches and community-driven perspectives. After sharing our common depression on the state of tech, we shared a common vision that open source communities delivered back in the days. They delivered a clear alternative path to a more just internet, to more equal and accessible AI. And I guess that we should restart this vision. And at the same time, do more lobbying, follow data feminism by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, so produce counter data, invest heavily in digital literacy, train and run our own language models, support so-called small languages and large language models, and have more of these gatherings, where we should invite people in charge of tech government and governance, like our own Digitalisierungsministerium. We should inspire more people to read Donna Haraway, Shoshana Zuboff, Arturo Escobar with his Design for the Pluriverse, and so much more. In my role as a professor at the Design Research Lab at the University of the Arts here in Berlin and at the DFKI, the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, I try to inspire my students to open the black box of AI very pragmatically. So in our seminar on AI disorders, we invited different experts from all over the world to give us their perspectives on AI, their dreams and hopes, their concerns, their visions. It was a fascinating kaleidoscope of AI. And afterwards, I asked the students to feed their notes that they were taking during the talks as prompts into an AI image generator and see how AI sees us. It was devastating. The cliches, the glossy tech vision, the lack of fantasy, and the reproduction of so many stereotypes was so sad. Many models seem to be trained on the Hollywood blockbusters that are out there. It all looks like Matrix 5.0 or something alike. So since 2 years, we are doing these experiments with our students, and we see at least a bit of change. Suddenly, there are more and more people of color depicted, surprise, more women, but no one, of course, disabled, and still these kind of blockbuster aesthetics and also stereotypes. There was one, I think, interesting initiative of a German company that's Otto Bock. They produce prostheses, so they deal a lot with of people with disabilities. They launched together a campaign with Microsoft to provide training data sets with images of disabled people, with the community of disabled people providing their own images, how they would like to be depicted, not as needy people, but in their everyday life situations. The campaign is called Dear AI and wants to advocate for more inclusive AI. So sometimes see some kind of posters hanging around. Maybe it will do a kind of little contribution to this kind of important topic. But this is just a tiny example of what we can do quite pragmatically to reduce racism and bias in AI. So I'm very happy to learn more about your outcomes and your maybe also practical examples. So please advise me and advise us for a more inclusive approach to AI and be outspoken about the topic. Include not only the experts, but talk to your neighbor, to children, to those who are affected by these developments, but are not aware of the issues. So thank you so much for inviting me. These were just some kind of loose ends and maybe just some thoughts to add to your conversations. Many thanks for your engagement and for your great work. Thanks to the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung for this wonderful collaboration. This is really what we currently need. For the teams that were putting up together this wonderful program, and for all of you who were coming here, and for the great translators who are there in the boxes. So thanks a lot for the translation to German and to Portuguese. So I wish you all an inspiring conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Giesche-Joest and dear Peggy Piesche. What a powerful way and also encouraging way to ground us why this conversation matters here in this room. You also highlighted why we need collaboration and diverse perspectives, just as you are, bringing knowledge from different countries all around the world, from Brazil, from South Africa, from India, from South Korea, Germany, Brasilia, and many more also when looking online, for example. So before we dive in and exchange all the different perspectives that you bring in the workshops, we also need a shared understanding of the global landscape, what we are dealing with. And for this, there's no better person to do that than Dr. Sita Peña Gangadharan from the London School of Economics. Your work sits exactly at the intersection where this conference lies: digital technology, marginalization, and governance. The interesting part as well here, after her keynote, we have a 10 minutes Q&A. So I encourage you to take down any reflections or notes you have during her presentation. So please all welcome me on introducing Seta on the stage.
Good afternoon. Many thanks for the introduction and for the welcome, and for Francesca and the rest of the staff that got me here safely today. I'm delighted to be sharing this space with you in thinking about and addressing the problem of AI's power in society today. The purpose of this talk is to address three interlocking discriminatory problems posed by the adoption and wide-scale implementation of artificial intelligence. These are, in my opinion, political inequality, epistemic injustice, and material inequality. These are not necessarily unusual problems when we look at the social history of technologies over the past at least several decades. We have, to a certain extent, been here before. But the intensity with which and the scale at which they are occurring give them new urgency. So this talk proceeds as follows. First, I set the stage of these problems, arguing that the AI sector is emerging against and is intertwined with the rise of financialized capitalism, as well as the polycrisis that financialized capitalism provokes. This stage setting borrows in large part from political theorists, historians, and journalists. I have to give credit where credit is due, so I'll insert these throughout my talk. Second, having established the financialized backdrop of AI, I enumerate each of the three discriminatory problems. Again, political inequalities, epistemic injustice, and material inequalities. These points draw, again, from political theory, but also from across critical race theory, as well as critical data studies, and much, much more. Third, I finish by briefly discussing AI's discriminatory impacts with respect to the idea of crisis and contradiction, and also refusal. So here I'm drawing in large part from my own work and from work that I've done with collaborators, which is equal parts research, engagement, and organizing that I've done in the field of tech justice. By the end of the talk, I hope you walk away with a wider framing of the problems of AI and discrimination, a deeper familiarity with the nature of discriminatory AI, but also a sense of the quote-unquote solution space that can both constrain and enable transformative change. I hope that you'll be engaged to confront and question where now, where to now, how, why, and with whom. So part one, financialized capitalism and the polycrisis, putting AI's discriminatory problems in context. We live in a financialized capitalist world, and AI is both central protagonist and benefactor. As the most recent headlines of the initial public offering of Elon Musk's SpaceX company demonstrates, how money makes money from money is the name of the game. To understand AI's discriminatory power, it's useful to know that in this current configuration of capitalism, capital has been freed in radically new ways and depends on new developments in financial services, products, and their infrastructure. For consumers and citizens, financialized capitalism is experienced by buy now, pay later schemes, and by subscription services. It is experienced in relation to stock market-dependent retirement security plans, i.e. your pension plans, or by temporary or occasional work that people take to make ends meet, also known as the side hustle. For corporations, financialized capitalism means having low cash reserves, investing in the stock market, not only selling AI products and services, for example, avoiding corporate tax, or writing down debt. It means establishing special economic zones, tax havens, charter cities. It means the central importance of global financial institutions, central banks, and related financial institutions who compete with, if not surpass, the governing power of states. Against this backdrop, as Nancy Fraser writes, a polycrisis is emerging. This term, if you're unfamiliar with it, refers to the idea that multiple crises, typically thought as and treated as distinctive, reinforce one another in compounding ways. Now, this might not be a surprise to any of us who have worked or benefited from the framework of intersectionality, we'll set that aside for now. But suffice it to say that crisis has always been a feature of capitalism, and states and other power holders have stepped in to manage these crises. Different, however, from previous eras, as today's financialized capitalism chases success down a path of self-destruction, the interlocking nature of crises has become more pronounced. Moreover, and I think very significantly for this discussion, in the context of this discussion, how society confronts these crises is both unsettling, it causes deep anxiety, right, and uncertainty, and it is also unsettled. Colloquially speaking, the world is on fire, it feels terrible, and there is very little consensus on how to resolve these problems. So before diving into the connection between the AI sector, global financialized capitalism, let me just review 4 of these crises as enumerated by Nancy Fraser. First, there is a crisis of social reproduction. And Fraser particularly grounds her discussion with respect to race and gender, though we can also think of other hegemonic forms of othering. Second, an ecological crisis. Third, a crisis of imperialism. And fourth, borrowing from Habermas, a legitimation crisis. Here, social reproduction refers to the systems and processes that society creates to order itself. Race and racism have been central engines of this ordering and central engines of capitalist relations. This social preferencing corresponds with labor practices that exploit Black and brown bodies, that expropriate, i.e. steal, the land of Black and brown peoples, that expatriate them or cause forced migration. While racialized bodies are most severely treated, Fraser argues, quite provocatively, that financialized capitalism also exploits, expropriates, and expatriates indiscriminately, causing widespread levels of deprivation and marginalization once considered the sole reserve of the other. In fact, we can look to many of the xenophobic movements that have arisen or surged in different parts of the world today in relation to this crisis. With respect to gender, financialized capitalism poses a comparable, unsettled, and unsettling situation. Fraser explains that while capitalism has depended on free or cheap reproductive labor, there is now a crisis of the quote-unquote care economy. Yes, free and cheap gendered labor continues. However, the costs of care are now externalized onto whole families, including husbands, domestic partners, grandparents, and extended members of family. And one could argue that many of the hyper-masculinist movements, sort of the kinds of things that you see on TikTok and other social media where men are sort of asserting their masculinity in ways that feel very loud and also very obnoxious and are deeply violent towards women. Many would argue that hyper-masculinist movements are a reaction to this problem, and simultaneously that these hyper-masculinist movements intersect also with increasing xenophobia. With respect to imperialism, we know that capitalism has long depended on subjugating and stealing lands from the quote-unquote periphery to sustain its expansion. As Fraser says, in this case, extraction in the periphery has become even more pronounced thanks to the pressure and interlocking nature of global supply chains. And we might look to some of the impacts here in relation to migratory patterns of peripheral populations to the core and how they're implicated in this process. With respect to the current ecological crisis, the environment has always been treated by capitalism as an infinite resource to plunder, but also as a receptacle in which to dump the excesses of capitalist production. However, in this era of financialized capitalism, while previously viewed in isolation, now the ecological crisis isn't just a problem of specific places, from El Nino to environmental disasters. These affect everyone on the planet, even when their cause is not agreed upon. Finally, Fraser names the legitimation crisis of financialized capitalism. And this is an area that I hold with great interest. An easy way to understand the legitimation crisis is in terms of the declining nature of public power in politics and political systems. As global financial flows intensify, politicians have become captive to global financial institutions, central banks, other financial bodies, and less accountable to the citizens that they govern. Under the conditions of a legitimation crisis, problems like political apathy, political mistrust, and non-participation grow alongside appeals to populism and polarization, often to the detriment or in a compounding manner to the crises of imperialism, ecology, and social reproduction. To sum up briefly, I'm arguing that AI's discrimination problems are emerging against the backdrop of financialized capitalism and polycrisis. Financialization is reckless. To succeed, it needs to destroy that which sustains it. Given the scale of global financial flows, its infrastructure and institutions, exploitation, extraction, expropriation, expulsion, all of these things are continuing as before, as well as departing from it. How to manage these interlocking crises remains unsettled and unsettling. Part 2, the AI sector and 3 forms of discriminatory power. So finally, I get to talk about AI and the AI sector. And I want to, as I mentioned earlier, talk about material inequalities, immaterial inequalities, or in the symbolic or epistemic realm, epistemic injustice, and political inequalities. When we place the AI sector in the context of financialized capitalism and polycrisis, it becomes evident that artificial intelligence is both protagonist and benefactor. This sector, which I'll try and define, includes a vast ecosystem ranging from computational service providers to AI developers, from chip makers to rare earth mineral mining companies, and from property developers developing data centers to the data janitors scrubbing data sets or testing prompts. AI is both fueled by globalized financialized markets and fuels the acceleration of these markets. To the latter point, the sector's quote-unquote move fast, break things mantra and blitz scaling methods underline its commitment to accelerated growth strategies. Computational service providers and AI developers lie at the head of the pack. Collectively valued at several $trillion, many tech companies use myriad techniques to drive up profitability and stock prices. They do not merely create and sell products. These profit-driving techniques have included, at least in the case of the United States, the amount of cash that's kept on hand by corporations, corporate tax avoidance, aggressive acquisition of startups, the write-down of debt in acquisitions, the write-down of the cost of nonprofit ventures implemented by these companies, risk shifting from corporations to consumers, the plunder of public subsidy programs for private benefit, and the evisceration of labor protections for its workforce. To the former, that AI is fueled by global financialized markets, these accelerationist techniques adopted by AI companies did not develop or emerge accidentally. Rather, they reflect choices by the regulatory state to condone and enable such behavior. During the Great Recession, itself a result of securitization of subprime mortgages, computational service providers in the United States pursued a rapid path of growth that supposedly buoyed the national economy. In this moment, these companies played and perfected avoiding the game of avoiding taxes while driving up stock prices. Today, against a different but comparable scenario of global conflict, the AI sector is also admired for its accelerated productivity and wealth-making prospects. Nation-states are granting companies in the AI sector many breaks. Here, they don't just function as leaders, AI companies are benefactors. This scenario contributes to the current political imbalance that we see in AI governance. So here I will talk about political inequality, AI's first discriminatory problem. AI governance leaves little room for the public to exercise its power, while the AI sector is given preferential treatment. This is the first problem of discrimination, a political inequality that plagues how the industry is regulated. Simply stated, citizens are second class, while actors in the AI ecosystem are first class. This second-class treatment results when governments often kowtow to industry players. They need the AI sector to generate wealth. They need this wealth in part because the previously effective means of generating public wealth, such as taxes, have fallen into disfavor, thus depriving public coffers from the funds that they need to serve and manage populations. While citizens might express concerns, for example, over the water and energy usage of a data center and its impact on load shedding, water quality, or rationing, governments do little more than offer public fora for citizens to express their discontent. Under these conditions, as Sherry Onstein argued decades ago, citizens participate in participation, but ultimately little else. They are invited to public consultations or public forums, but in a manner that merely confirms their existence while denying them political influence. Public powerlessness manifests in other ways too, such as dropping out or avoiding the whole AI debate or decision-making. Why participate when nothing will change? Whether elections or party processes, many citizens are captured by apathy. Between political inefficacy and political apathy, this problem relates conspicuously to the crisis of legitimation referred to above. While the state has the responsibility to manage, serve, and protect its populations, AI governance appears to be rigged in favor of actors whose wealth is sought after by state actors. Left behind, members of the public develop distrust. They lose faith in government to steward its populations, compounding their powerlessness in the process. The powerlessness of the public described above links and relates to the second type of discriminatory power of AI. This form of discrimination is best understood according to Miranda Ficker's term, epistemic injustice, the discursive rules of the game that determine whose discourse is credible and whose discourse is interpretable. In the realm, if a speaker comes to a public forum to speak about their concerns, say about the incorporation of automated decision-making tools and the provision of social welfare, their lived experience will often be interpreted by forum participants as lacking legitimacy. This may be due in part because of the speaker's social status, a recipient of social welfare services whose immigration status and racial identity historically marks them as untrustworthy. Listeners, in this case, inflict a type of testimonial injustice on the speaker due to their pre-existing prejudices. A speaker may also be deemed inexpert in matters of artificial intelligence, lacking in competency for how automated welfare really works in technical terms. Speakers here suffer what is called a hermeneutical injustice, meaning the non-techie speakers do not have the same insights as AI developers, product managers, or other members of the tech elite whose knowledge and meaning making matter more than that of the everyday person. The definition of societal problems as in need of efficient, optimized solutions that the AI industry experts can provide occurs across private and public decision makings, whether the state is involved or not. Arguments such as it's inevitable, or do not be left behind, or AI is here to stay, are emblematic of discursive logics that bound the fields of action, privileging AI adoption at the expense of other suitable alternatives. In this sense, epistemic injustice does not only relate to AI governance and political inequality, but also extends into other contexts. Two dimensions are worth noting. First, AI, or the hype machine that surrounds it, validates a certain kinds of knowledge, and through this process of meaning and sense-making, the field of action they enable. Have a problem? Whatever its genre, AI can provide the solution. Once the hype has peaked, whether at work, at home, at school, or on the street, other systems of knowledge that had once a role to play in making sense and solving problems, such as narrative, stories, even qualitative data, these are displaced by the work of data-rich, compute-heavy, AI-enabled systems. This is the techno-solutionism that Evgeny Morozov warned against nearly a decade ago. Second, AI creates epistemic injustice, not only in relation to itself through hyped solutions, but it also creates an epistemic injustice more broadly in relation to pre-existing social hierarchies and historic forms of oppression. When AI becomes embedded in the very infrastructures of information and communication, it actively shifts what is knowable, which interpretive frames matter, whose speech counts. In other words, AI shapes epistemic conditions themselves, reinforcing and creating new hierarchies of meaning and action. This shaping power raises many questions about AI's role in stoking fears, anxieties, and hatred that accompany polycrisis in shaping whether and how the AI sector plays a role in addressing the polycrisis. Material inequalities capture AI's third discriminatory problem. That is, whether conceived as a product or as an infrastructure or as a discourse, AI exploits, extracts, and expels all for its own accelerated growth. Those affected are individual users, consumers, workers, their families and support networks, residents, communities, and the environment itself. Let me take these in turn using a couple of key terms. Many of you will be familiar with the pioneering work of Sophia Noble, Timnit Gebru, and Joy Boalongwini and their collaborators. It is now publicly well known that AI systems can engender discrimination and injustice by virtues of error in data collection and analysis. AI engenders problems of algorithmic racism, reproducing racial disparities in real time at scale in automated decision-making. AI also engenders problems of the coded gaze, of white masculinist engineers. The broligarchy begets broligarchy tools. Racism and sexism, among other forms of hegemonic discrimination, are baked into the computational logics and operations of AI. In this manner, as political economist Oscar Gandy argues, automated decision-making exacerbates existing material inequalities. While these forms of user discrimination are by far the most common way of thinking about material inequalities wrought by artificial intelligence, there are other forms of encoded prejudice. For example, managerial surveillance affects all workers with a punitive carceral logic. By managerial surveillance, I mean systems of AI-enabled work management software that tracks and targets workers. This kind of enterprise software reflects a managerial logic that production processes need to be efficient and optimized. Managerial surveillance relies on a complex system of data collection to make sense of whether workers are achieving their maximum output. In the process, workers are treated as responsible for the harms of work that they might experience. In fact, they're punished for them. As a result, or what we see in this case, is that the costs of risks in the workplace are shifting onto workers and their support networks, which was not previously the case when corporations used to absorb and pay for some of those costs. Beyond this, material inequalities do not result from discriminatory AI products alone. AI is also an infrastructure that affects more than just users at the individual level. The problem of AI colonialism serves as case in point. As Karen Howe's work has helped us to understand, the AI sector continues a tradition of global north actors exploiting the global south in terms of labor, resources, and land. AI companies' overseas business takes its toll on the environment and public resources, as well as decreases lack of faith in politicians to protect citizens' access to clean water, electricity, or other public services. AI companies' pursuit of cheap labor recalls the legacy of imperial slave trade, though Western imperial powers are not the only perpetrators of colonial instincts. This time, laborers around the world are indirectly hired through business processing outsource companies or other third parties to evade legal safeguards designed to protect them. Whatever the case may be for the user, worker, their families, the communities in which they live, the citizenry to which they belong, the land on which they live, any costs of exploitation, extraction, expropriation, or expatriation are disproportionately borne by them. My collaborators and I tend to use this term risk shifting, but we've also heard it in terms of this idea of the digital rebound, the idea that there are diminishing returns on the implementation of technical systems. This is a lot, and it suggests a lot is to be done. And I haven't even been able to incorporate a discussion of AI and war into this talk. Before moving on to a few concluding thoughts and provocations, let me try and tie up the arguments I've presented and draw out some connections. To summarize, I have discussed how the AI sector is both protagonist and benefactor of global financial flows. It doesn't just make products or build infrastructure. It too makes money from money, trillions. The second point is its extreme accelerated forms of growing profit AI's extreme accelerated forms of growing profit tie to its ability to exacerbate and create interlocking political, epistemic, and material inequalities. The third point to bring these ideas together is that these inequalities track back to the polycrisis, and AI plays a role on multiple levels in deeply entangling and disturbing ways. Now, ethically, I cannot end an invited talk by just presenting a litany of terrible things. I am a scholar who, over the last 16 years, has been working at the intersection of research, engagement, and organizing, and have done this often in a collaborative and participatory manner. What I and collaborators have been trying to accomplish is to understand what it means to push back. What does technological refusal entail? And what started as an inquiry into individual forms of resistance, of fighting back against the ways in which automated technologies control us, I have evolved, and with collaborators, we have evolved in a perspective that feels like a lifelong project of trying to figure out what creates political possibilities and collective power with respect to technological governance. In an article I co-wrote with Jedřich Nicholas many years back, we advocate for the decentering of technology in the discourse on discrimination. Our position urged that the approach to data-driven discrimination lie beyond data literacy, lie beyond de-biasing automated systems in a technical manner. We called for a more holistic, systemic approach that looks beyond just conventional interventions. Today, AI's role in deepening divisions and inequalities, and in creating new ones, and in stoking the polycrisis, demands this type of decentering and more. And what I mean by more is confronting and connecting between what feel like very difficult contradictions of our AI-enabled world and coordinating and cooperating in new ways. I, with collaborators Gwen, Grace, Claudia, Lexi, and Dimitra, have been trying to do this with our work with respect to managerial surveillance. And what we've done is we've tried to take an abolitionist lens and apply or extend it in a somewhat universalist manner. It has taken us to very strange places in identifying both disablers and enablers, in this case, of collective workers' well-being, or workers' collective well-being, right? So again, this sort of thinking about contradictions and crises has really forced us to think in situations where I don't think we've ever traveled before. To give you an example, we've been thinking about unusual times, unusual spaces, and unusual partners, in this case, in terms of worker speech and worker organizing. And what we mean by unusual partners is sometimes thinking to market actors. I have never spent so much time learning about the insurance industry, about liability insurance, and it has been a really fascinating journey, and I'm happy to talk about how we arrived at this idea of thinking about collective worker rights in relation to insurance. But these are the types of partnerships and stepping out of unconventional solution spaces that I think these time warrants. On this note, as you turn towards the rest of the program, I invite you to ask yourselves, where to now? In the face of these horribles, why, how, and with whom? I leave you to the task for now and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Seta, for this wonderful overview and also helping us understand the urgency, the global dimension, and the complexity of the topic we are dealing with. You can, if you want, of course, sit down here, because we now have roughly 10 minutes for in Q&A. We have 2 microphones in the room, and I would now just look into the room and ask who has the first question, or just a reflection on what we hear. I know it's always difficult to be the first one, but just if you have something to share or want to reflect on a topic, yes, please. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, wow. It's so weird to hear my voice on the microphone. Thank you very much for your speech. My name is Fernanda. I am from Brazil. And I think it's kind of a comment and a question, I don't know. But I am a PhD in law, and I'm trying to save the law, I think, because law itself, it may be a problem because it kind of legitimizes violence sometimes, but I am trying to understand what is a risk-based approach to counter structural discrimination in Brazil, especially algorithmic racism. And I don't know yet how to do it, but because I'm writing my thesis right now. But what I'm trying to understand is if we can imagine like inherent risks to make people look after structural discrimination by default. Like you don't consider racial risk, algorithmic racial risk to be something that may happen. It will happen unless you do something about it. So it kind of changed the lens because you are not expecting for it to maybe happen, but you consider it will, and then you have to do something to avoid it. So I would like to know if it makes sense to you, and also because when we are talking about law in financial capitalist system, I don't know if law is the way that we can challenge these issues because it can legitimize violence sometimes. So I don't know if there's an answer, but this is my something that's been concerning me right now.
Thank you very much for sharing.
I come from the camp that law is always going to be incomplete. I'm a social scientist, so I think it comes with the territory. But, right, yes, absolutely. Law is a sort of perpetrator of violence. In many cases, it has substantiated a racist, capitalist system for hundreds of years, right? At the same time, so I approach my work with that lens, but at the same time, there is a need, I think, to think about the intersections between what's happening in civil society, what's happening in the marketplace, and what's happening with respect to law, right? And of course, I mean, if you come from that sort of world of digital legal scholars, you'll think, also, how does code fit into that? But I think it's this combination that really requires a lot of care and thought about how do they conflict with one another, how can they play off of one another, when do they sort of align with one another. Sometimes they do, and I feel like, at least from the vantage of the work that I've done on surveillance and discriminatory systems, most recently in the workplace, right, thinking about when is the law incomplete and how does that give some space for maneuver within civil society is really important, right? And so to come up with some innovative ways of organizing, right, seems really, really relevant, because without that momentum, legal advocacy will get you some incremental change, but it won't be complete. So thinking about how the different sort of triggers or stimuli kind of function in relation to one another is, I think, really exciting and difficult.
Yeah. Thank you. Here in the second row, yes. Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I was wondering that when you place that in the historical trajectory of financial capitalism, how certain industries were given tax benefits and more and more advantages. I'm speaking on behalf of the work that we did in the Indian context, where we also see that there's some sort of urgency that is established in terms of having more and more AI infrastructure as fast as possible, and then in order to justify that, we really need more and more AI infrastructure, you give more and more subsidies and more support, or 20 years tax holidays to these kind of industries. So the idea of establishing AI infrastructures as critical infrastructure, like the similar category of electricity, water, and transport, and giving the same advantages to them, where do you place these developments in the theoretical analysis that you're offering?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would have a somewhat similar answer, right? I think there are some really interesting new legal classifications that can work to the advantage of sort of, enlivening a public or sort of rebuilding the public sphere. But at the same time, reclassifying AI as critical infrastructure is always only going to be one part of the situation, right? And what I see in the work that we've done on police surveillance, for example, is that often, while these sort of legal debates with their technical details are being argued out, meanwhile, somebody that's been misclassified in a police database and then profiled on the basis thereof, that doesn't translate for them. So law on paper and law in practice, there's a wide gulf, right? And again, where I think some of that interesting action and space for discovery lies is with thinking about, okay, well, how do we bring this conversation to a larger audience at scale, right? Because when you talk to people about when they've been misclassified, this is separate from the classification of AI as a critical infrastructure, but in the case of police surveillance, if they've been misclassified, right? Once you start to replicate that conversation at a wider scale, it starts to make sense and drive momentum, public momentum and political momentum in different ways. For the question of critical AI infrastructure, I mean, maybe without using that language, it would be really interesting to hold a public deliberation on that, right? And I don't mean public deliberation as in the deliberative poll or these other kinds of techniques of bringing people in a sort of very scientific survey-like, quasi-focus group-like situation. I'm talking about organic types of conversation because that's what we lack, right? I cannot tell you how many times I've come into a room and we've posed the question of tech injustice, broadly speaking. And every single person has a way to connect into that story, right? And then that discussion becomes a real sort of lightning rod for, oh, actually, well, I didn't know that this is a thing that people are concerned about and get activated around, right? So I think, yes, there are some interesting ways to reclassify what AI does. We have to anticipate where that might go wrong while thinking about stirring up discussion, controversy. Also anticipate in conversation what that's going to feel like on the ground level.
Thank you, Seta, for this elaborative answer, and thank you for your thoughtful reflections and questions. With respect to time, I would suggest that we continue this conversation in the break. First of all, thank you, Seta, for joining me on stage here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I mentioned the break, but before a short break, we need to, of course, also zoom in a little bit. We heard about the global landscape, and that's many projects and discussion going on there, but how does it look precisely in Germany? For this, I would love to invite a very special person. We heard her name several times now here in this conference, Francesca Schmidt. She's the woman behind all of this, behind the workshops happening behind this agenda, and she will now talk about civic education here in Germany. The stage is yours, Francesca. Thank you.
So, thank you very much for this really nice introduction. And before I begin, I also want to take a moment to thank everyone who has contributed to making this conference happen. Our partners at Goethe-Institut, the researchers, activists, practitioners who participated in the workshops across all the regions, in particular those also who joined us in Berlin for the German workshop. And what has emerged from that process is something I find worth sharing. And I'm glad we have the space to do so here together. Now I need my glasses so I can read it better here a little bit. Okay. When people start thinking politically about AI, they tend to think about products and incidents. Chatbots that spread false information, deepfakes that put words into mouths of politicians they never said, algorithms that discriminate in certain cases. This is all understandable, and it is not wrong. Phenomena are the necessary entry point into any political engagement with AI, but they cannot be the destination. A recent study on prior conceptions of student teachers in politics and social studies, presented by Professor Dr. Inken Held from the University of Passau, suggests that this narrowing to visible individual phenomena is widespread in German education context, and that it can lead to a systematic underestimation of what is political about AI. AI then appears as a tool that can be used well or badly, as an information source that should be checked critically, as an efficiency machine that sometimes makes mistakes. What can recede into the background is the question of what does AI structurally. We already talked a lot about this, because AI does not just occasionally misclassify people. It does it systematically. It changes the condition under which knowledge is produced, circulates, and recognized as valid. And it's not neutral infrastructure that occasionally goes wrong, but a socio-technical system embedded in existing power relations, one that actively reproduces them. The distinction is the starting point of what we have brought back from a year of international workshop work in 5 regions, as already mentioned: Brazil, South Africa, India, South Korea, and Germany. Civil society actors, researchers, practitioners work together on AI, power, and discrimination. What emerged is not a unified picture, but there are lines running through all 5 workshops, through all five regions, and there are also tensions that are very productive, actually. What I present here is a short selection. The workshops were far richer than this input can ever be. So we hope to bring the full results together in a joint publication by the Bundeszentrale and the Goethe-Institut as the next step. Before I turn to the findings, a brief note on language. When I use the term Global South and Global North, I am not referring to fixed geographical categories, but to structural positions in the global distribution of technological power. Who controls infrastructure, who sets the standards, who bears the cost. These positions are not uniform within regions, and they are contested. The workshops themselves push back on any simple mapping, that I can tell you. So I've brought like 3 findings or 3 lines that goes through all 5 workshops, and the first one would be whose knowledge counts. In the South African workshops, the expert describes how statistical learning from large data sets structurally excludes lived, relational, and cultural knowledge. Precisely the knowledge that lives in oral traditions, community practice, and the concept of Ubuntu. And this can loosely be translated as I am because we are. Reflecting an understanding of knowledge and responsibility that is not individual but relational. AI systems built on statistical majority decisions and Western-dominated data sets cannot structurally represent this knowledge. One concrete outcome of the South African workshop is the development of an Ubuntu AI scorecard designed to make the distribution of power and African data sovereignty in AI systems measurable. In India, the same question appears at a different level. A large proportion of training images in widely deployed AI systems show white skin, and the reality of rural women's lives are almost entirely absent. Access to digital infrastructure is strongly shaped by caste, class, and gender. Initiatives like Kaba Laharia, a rural news outlet run from women from Dalit and other marginalized communities and produced by Chambal Media, show that participation in AI cannot be separated from the question of social power. In Brazil, the problem is captured by the concept of gambiarra. When technology is developed in a favela, it is seen as improvisation. When the same solution comes from the global north, it's called innovation. AI systems trained on Western-dominated data reproduce this asymmetry. They decide what counts as knowledge and whose solutions count. In South Korea, the question was approached differently. What does AI do to the knowledge we already have? AI-driven processes in the K-content industry produce cultural leveling, where language models set the standard for emotional and cultural expression, and cultural differences disappear not through exchange, but through statistical normalization. The workshop also criticized AI language itself. The term in artificial general intelligence draws a boundary between those who master the technology and those who do not, feeding social fears of being left behind. In the German workshop, researchers and civil society actors discuss what it means when AI literacy becomes a marker of social distinction, signaling adaptation of technological systems rather than the critical reflection. Existing education inequalities are extended into the digital space, rather than challenged here. The second finding would be who benefits from extraction, or the second line we have together. In the Brazilian workshop, AI was placed in the context of digital geopolitics. Technological sovereignty is structurally out of reach for many countries. Computing capacities and infrastructure remains concentrated in the global north, while data is extracted from somewhere else. The environmental costs, water use, energy consumption, and raw material extraction are borne disproportionately by those who benefit least. In the South African workshop, a related mechanism was described. Western systems are aggressively marketed to African markets, while local research and development capacities remains underfunded. The environmental burden of data center energy was discussed as a question of climate justice. Who pays the price for an infrastructure from which others profit? In South Korea, the new AI law regulates high-risk AI, but does not explicitly prohibit technologies with high potentials for human rights violation, including biometric surveillance, and excludes XI for defense purposes entirely. When people are harmed by AI systems, accountability is systematically distributed across developers, systems, and users in a way that leaves victims with little resources. In India, AI systems developed primarily by people from certain social groups carry the potential to digitize, and entrench existing inequalities along the lines of caste, class, and gender, rather than challenging them. The third line or finding would be what protects whom and who does it not protect. In the German workshop, the question was raised of whether individual data protection law actually works for everyone in practice. The GDPR is often treated as an ethical gold standard of European AI regulation. But the workshop discussed whether this protection reaches groups that are structurally more exposed to state surveillance. Data protection as an individual right might work best where people can already fully exercise their rights as citizens. This was not a rejection of data protection as a tool, it was an invitation to ask critically who is this tool built for. The South African concept of collective data sovereignty approaches this from another direction. Individual consent in a multilingual society where large parts of the population cannot or do not read terms of conditions is not an adequate protection. What is needed is a relational form of accountability that treats communities, not just individuals, as bearer of rights. The German workshop again also developed a concept with broader relevance for civic education. Institutions of contestation. The idea is not simply that people should be able to file complaints, but they should be able to challenge AI decisions structurally through democratic mechanisms. This is a different demand on regulation than the product safety focus of the European AI Act. So what does this mean for civic education in Germany? Civic education on AI needs concrete cases and visible mechanisms, but it falls short if it stays there. The question this conference is asking go further. What social structures does AI reproduce? Who controls the infrastructure? Whose knowledge counts and whose does not? What does democratic contestation look like in a society shaped by AI? This systemic perspective does not only come from outside Germany, it's represented here too, in research and civil society among people whose experiences of exclusion and marginalization are underrepresented in the public debate about AI. The international material developed in our workshop sharpens this perspective because the experience of extraction, epistemic exclusion, and missing accountability has generated sharper and more precise questions in other contexts. So this conference is an invitation to think through these questions and to all those questions you posed here, to think through these questions together across regions and disciplines without rushing to answers. After a year of working on this project, I cannot think of a better place to continue that conversation, and I'm very happy that you are all here, and thank you, and then we can go now into the break, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Francesca, for this excellent and interesting overview of the three different findings. These are definitely the food for thought now for the coming break, but also for our 3 or 4 different parallel workshops coming up. And you already said it's an invitation. So I really invite you to think out of your own box, out of your own national borders, because we are here gathered to think and act interdisciplinary. So we now have approximately 20 minutes for a refreshing break. And then you'll hear that little sound. And then if you hear the sound, please kindly ask you then to come back, because then we have a panel on digital sovereignty. After this panel, we finally start with our active part, with the workshops and an evening reception. So now enjoy your break.
myself down to the bottom. Here is no place to hide and no one can call me. My name is so tidy, call me daddy girl. You made me a sinner, so I'm on my own. Falling apart, no stopping to lose. I'm clumsy and not, you call me a loser. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. I swear you can call me a loser. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. I swear you can call me a loser. I swear you can call me a loser. My name is so tidy, call me daddy girl. You made me a sinner, so I'm on my own. Falling apart, no stopping to lose. I'm clumsy and not, they call me a loser. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. I swear you can call me a loser. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. I swear you can call me a loser. I let myself down to the bottom. Here is no place to hide and no one can call me. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. I swear you can call me a loser.
Okay. Welcome back. I hope you had a refreshing, energizing break, because now I want to start with a little scenario. Imagine waking up tomorrow, losing access to one of the world's most powerful AI systems, not because you chose to do so, but because someone else from somewhere else decided you should not use it anymore. Suddenly, questions that seemed rather technical and far-fetched become concrete, and as we also heard today from the opening speech, they become real, because we experience this. So who controls the infrastructure that we are using and we are relying on? Who shapes the rules? To help us unpack these insightful and very interesting, important questions, I'm now delighted to welcome my three outstanding panelists, who all have multidisciplinary work doing and are representative from different countries. So please now help me welcoming on stage Professor for Primus, Professor Ruang M. Park, so JP, and Dr. Clara Iglesias Keller. Please join me now on stage. You can sit in the middle, yes. You can sit on the left, yes, and here next to me. Exactly. Okay. When I did research on your background and on the topic, something really interesting came into my mind, and it is that we have here now 5 or 6 different nationalities, even though we are 4 people. So, Professor for Primus, you are coming from University of Johannesburg, so South Africa. And really remarkably, you are among the 100 most influential women in tech in South Africa. You focus on computational linguistics. So this is really remarkable achievement. Second, we have South Korea. JP, your research spans a lot of disciplines, multidisciplines, and you also work on human-centered AI vision. You also even are the author of a best-selling book, The Future is Not Created, where we also look into the post-AI era session. And finally, we have Dr. Clara Keller. You are from the Weizenbaum Institute, and you are a legal scholar here, specialized in digital technology regulation with experience in Germany and Brazilian backgrounds. So we have now 4. And then my background is, I'm also a computer scientist. I'm in the Federal Ministry of Research, Technology and Space, where I'm doing AI transformation, and I'm also still a master's. But my background is in, my parents come from Turkey, so we now have like 5, 6 different perspectives, which are highly relevant in the next 90 minutes. Because digital sovereignty is a broad topic, and I saw no one agreeing on a definition on digital sovereignty because it's so broad. And that's why I'm very, very looking forward now to the discussion, because we need a multidisciplinary approach, and also you at the end asking your questions, of course. I want to start with a warm-up question, and I know it's not prepared, but I want to kind of ask one thing. What's the first thing that comes into your mind when we talk about digital sovereignty? Maybe you have like 1 or 2 sentences that directly pop into your mind. Maybe you can directly share. I know it's just impromptu question.
No stress. I think for me it's about being able to control and shape one's digital economy and digital future. Yeah.
Thanks.
So when I hear digital sovereignty, I think of something that sounds good, but in reality it doesn't really is good. So a whole lot of things, but this is one of them. So
Thank you so much, Dylan, and thanks so much to the organization for including me in this event. As the legal scholar in the panel, I'm going to go straight for the right to self-determination that can be exercised in different dimensions of individual and collective life.
Perfect. Now we got a rough understanding. And the following 90 minutes are structured as follows. So first of all, in the first block, I want to ask what is actually at stake. So why do we need to talk about it today in this room? Then we go further in asking who holds the power and what is mentioned. Actually, like, what is the power? Is it infrastructure, for example? And lastly, we want to ask the question, what kind of sovereignty do we actually want here? So Clara, because you also said you are working in this legal fields crossing Brazilian and German legal context. What does European regulation actually protect? Where does it protect? And where does it produce new forms of exclusion when we come now to the topic of digital sovereignty?
Well, I'm very interested in how different regulatory arrangements are trying, and I say trying because I think we all know they're not managing, to deconcentrate power that is replicated through digital technologies. And although I have been very critical of concepts like the Brussels effect, I also acknowledge that the European experience has provided a benchmark for regulation, right? It has provided a vocabulary, at the very least, for us to discuss how technology should be regulated, even if we are to point its limitations and its biases and its pertinence to a certain specific cultural background. And in terms of AI and how it replicates or not exclusion, I think we go straight to the AI Act. We can also have this conversation in different levels about the GDPR and the DSA. But in terms of the AI Act specifically, what we have here is a legislation that, as Francesca already mentioned, is very much focused on product safety. What has been widely criticized for overlooking the social technical character of AI technologies, the way they are embedded in the social fabric and will therefore co-shape it. And here in the European experience, we see this tendency to increasingly adopt regulatory approaches that are focused on risk rather than being focused on rights. And I think there's an important lesson here, which is this risk-based approaches to regulation. They are a product of regulatory theories that have been fostered in the 70s, 80s, especially in the UK, very much this idea of better regulation, of smart regulation, of debureaucratization, which I don't think that was necessarily their intention back then, but which I believe, looking nowadays how it turned out, are also very much about concentrating regulatory power in the hands of private companies, right? This was the idea of debureaucratization. So risks regulation was originally thought of one of the ways to do that. In order to avoid red tape, let's just think about risks and regulate risks accordingly. But an inherent limitation to these arrangements has always been sectors that are fundamentally about fundamental rights. So there has always been a limitation of this sort of approach. They are more towards industrial policy and this sort of sectors that are not essentially about communication, which is the basis of democratic life, right? So I would say that while privileging this risk regulation paradigm, I think European regulation loses the opportunity to actually implement regulatory arrangements that will empower people and decenter the concentration of power that comes with technological infrastructure.
Thank you for elaborating on our European AI Act, which also saw a Brussels effect. But now coming back to a different kind of regulation, and I want to go to you, JP, when you also work on this field, but we see that the AI development in South Korea is very much advancing. Not so the regulation. or how would you see this in this field?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing going on in Korea. So Koreans, in typical Korean fashion, we like to be ranked within top 5 for whatever measure that we use. And as far as AI, the new government that we have since last year, they came into power with the sovereign AI, or the AI independence from other countries, and making the world Korea the 3rd best, again through whatever measure that is. And then they also talked about, okay, so we're not only going to do some irresponsible development, we'll actually have state-of-the-art regulation modeled after the EU AI Act, of course. So for 1 year they have been in power, they have actually referenced it, they have studied it. And this year, suddenly, they just passed a law and enacted the very first AI Act. And the thing they said was, okay, Europe started first, but Europe started doing it first, but we were the first ones to implement it for some reason. So that was the point of pride, I guess, for political purposes. But one of the problems when you actually look at the text, okay, on the outside, we actually we modeled it after the EU AI Act. But when I actually read it, so I'm not a legal scholar, but a legal scholar of mine told me the title has a problem to begin with. It's the law about promotion and regulation of AI. And he was asking, how can you put promotion, regulation, same sentence? They actually have to separate. That's the beginning part. And one of the problems was, okay, they say, okay, AI is such and such. And there could be some philosophical problems, but of course, they're bound to be. But one thing I really noticed was the only AI system that is to be regulated is called high impact. For instance, dealing with people's healthcare, national defense, public health, and things like that. But then again, right after the law was passed, which means that it was not really reviewed properly, those companies are asking, how do you designate what something is high impact or not? Because being designated high impact actually incurs more cost, right? Because it actually has to go through more regulation. You actually have to come up with a manual that actually will take time and money. And the government, after having passed a law, then clarified, if there's any point in the AI decision-making process, it requires human intervention, that is not high impact, okay? So I asked him, okay, then means, if the AI does all the decision-making and say, I have to review it, then there's a human intervention, and that makes it not high impact. They say yes. But what I'm trying to say here is, the law itself is, of course, every law, I think, is subject to political pressure. But when countries like Korea, who are only focused on development, when they say they are preparing regulations, the reality is it's not really happening. And it's actually a pretty dangerous precedent for other countries as well. Because, hey, Korea has done it, we'll just copy it, which in effect doesn't really regulate it. And another thing is, so that's the regulation part of the law. Another one's the promotion. Promotion was a little bit weird because it was about creation of this, 20-person committee who has all the power in the world to designate where the data centers will be built, what kind of projects will be promoted, and there's no clause for any monitoring of their activities. And I thought, okay, then maybe some people who are close to the politics or political power will get these positions that are enviable, and that is actually what's happening. So, the regulations, the governments say they're doing something that's really meaningful, but in reality, it's very doubtful.
Yeah, thank you for giving this context and also differentiating between regulation and promotion. What now? Going back to South Africa, where your research resides, because you do extensive research on AI systems that structurally fail for most of the African languages, which are not incorporated in our daily AI usage that we just heard, and which maybe also regulation doesn't really count into. Now my question is, who's expected to absorb the cost of closing it?
I think because now my PhD is going to start working quite over time. One of the biggest problems with AI and language models is that they actually reflect society. And society treats Africa as one village. and our languages as village languages, right? When you say African languages, Amharic, that is spoken in Ethiopia, has no connection to isiZulu. But when we do research, we clamp them together and try to fit them in this box of African languages, which makes no sense. It's like me saying Turkey and German are the same thing, because they happen to have, close proximity. And this also fails. And there's another assumption that comes from this village thinking. The assumption of language models fails because they assume three things, right? They assume that a language is documented, a language is well researched, and a language has digital tools that are true representative of that language. And all this happen to be false when you think about the history of language and colonization. Because languages in the continent, such as Africa and other parts of the world, Brazil, Colombia, indigenous languages, have been flattened, eroded, and those that survive better fitted into whoever the colonizer was. So if the English came in, then isiZulu would have to be fitted in. The vowel system, the sound system, the morphology, everything has to fit in to whoever is documenting at that time, right? And that would be the first evolution of a language. The second evolution of a language is how do we sound when we produce certain sounds? Why do we write the way that we write? Now that's an evolution that then understands the science of the language. And then the third one would be for us then going and writing our languages in Wikipedia, Twitter, Facebook, and so on and so forth. Now, where it fails is that we are now leapfrogging our languages from no documentation at all, or a boxed up documentation, no scientific foundational research, and trying to jump them into the digital economy, and then retrofit them with language models such as your BERT, and fine-tune them and try to fit them in these models and algorithms. And this is where the failure is. And I would like to say, well, hyperscalers should bear the cost. But actually, I think the public sector and governments should bear the cost, because these are the languages that are spoken in the community. Because what is needed in African communities and other, Brazil, Mexico, is the foundational research, is the financial R&D. Now, when we say hyperscalers may have a moral and ethical duty because of the extraction policies to help, but it's also up to our governments and our society to also now try to put our languages to a point that we can then digitally start to actually think about language models. I always say for a lot of our languages, we should not even be talking about AI, right? For a lot of our problems in society in Africa, we should not even think about AI. We need to think about the national development plans and how then AI could come in and help, and how language models can come in and help. And then we think about who we can ask for money to get this done.
Exactly. So you were highlighting the importance of foundational research. Thinking about now digital sovereignty, many scholars say, well, it depends where your data centers, digital infrastructures are. We now think again on Africa. So many data centers are now being built in Africa and South Africa. Does this change something in the equation? Even though we know that there's so much more on the other side to do, but does it somehow change the power equation, or is it not the right way to do it?
I think the question is, why do they have to be built in Africa? Why not being built in Washington, right? What kind of problems exist in Washington, or what kind of laws are in Washington that prohibit them from being built in Washington but in Cape Town? And it is not sovereignty, right? This is another, digital colonization and digital extraction. There is no sovereignty because we are not owning them. We don't understand how they're going to work. We don't understand the impact of the environment. Also, who's going to bear the cost 30 years from now on the environment? Is the same people who are building it going to bear the cost? What if tomorrow we get someone upset and then this decided to shut us off? Is that digital sovereignty? Or is it just putting infrastructure in a place where the laws are lax and people can get away with things and don't have to bear the costs of the disaster that will happen in the next foreseeable decades? And in that case, I think sovereignty has to be holistic. from models to software to infrastructure, everything that you need to be based in your house should be based in your house. A data center that we cannot control, that we cannot govern, that is governed by other nations, is no sovereignty.
Yeah, strong points. Thank you for highlighting this. And JP, I saw you nodding. Maybe you can add on your thoughts when thinking about South Korea and data centers.
So there have been reports, so basically centered in the US, that I heard that this year, about half of the data center projects to be built in US have been delayed or canceled because of the local resistance. And now about whether you're Democrat or Republican, many counties are banning the construction of data centers for the reason that it's making lives really miserable for the people there. The water's becoming scarcer, energy prices going up. And another thing is the area where the centers are, their average temperature is going up because they're burning so much fuel. And now that's only the physical part of it. And also the data labeling part is another thing. Now, this is a huge problem, especially for the countries where they speak English, because, of course, in the US is leading, the scale of the AI. And of course, it's not just automatic. Somebody has to label things, not only like cats and dogs, but dangerous things. So those people they are exposed to pictures and images and videos of murder and all the things. They actually have to watch the videos and tag the murders. They're actually going through severe, psychological problems. They're getting very sick, but they are not really talked about in the US for the same reason the data centers are built in those places where they think they need the money, but in the end, it's this imperialist model where in the end, you are giving more than you're getting. So that should be pointed out.
You were mentioning, and you also, Clara, said that it's a holistically approach on thinking of it, and somehow the ecological aspect that you were just highlighting does not really come into the equation, even though that there's the claim that AI will eventually solve the climate change. It's actually used to justify just the current energy cost. When we just, for example, look at the Jevons paradox that's happening. And in your research, you've called this an ideological legitimation. Why is this narrative so rarely challenged, JP?
Yeah, so one of the ways that those big companies were justifying their huge environmental contact was, so climate change is something that's really difficult to solve. Of course, people say it's a political issue that we can actually use all these technologies. But what they were doing was, so they say that humans have this one realistic choice, which is just spend all the energy we have right now in the hopes that the AGI or the AI, when it's sufficiently developed, will give us the answer to solve the climate change problem, okay? So that's the thing. So the AGI, that's AGI, artificial general intelligence, is saying that it's like the magic genie where we just build it until it gives the answer, and they're saying it is a bet worth taking. Now, I don't really believe that because as a physicist, those things, technical ones, actually they are not really, they don't stand up to huge scrutiny. That's what's happening. And all the other, even the classical, traditional big tech people in Silicon Valley falling for it, for instance, Eric Schmidt. So 15 years ago, he said to the graduating class from college 15 years ago, said, well, just close your laptops for a minute, just go outside, enjoy the real world. That's what they 15 years ago. Now he says, well, everything is going to be AI. And what's more dangerous is when he was asked about, those energy consumption and those climate change, he said, just a completely different person from 15 years ago, he said, you can actually look up on the YouTube, he says, well, I don't think we can meet the goals of climate change. So he said, it's better to give the AI companies all the power they need, again, in the hopes that it will give us the answer at some point. Now, this is philosophically problematic. Secondly, it's also very dangerous because it's also on the record that within the past 10 years, he and his family has made investments in AI technology in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's what in Korea we say, well, I give you the disease, I give you the medicine, right? So that's what they're proposing. And now they're saying that this is inevitable. So it works in many ways. So even if you don't like it, you have to follow us because you have no answer. And that is actually what they're saying all over the spectrum of Silicon Valley.
We're touching upon this power control. And Clara, because I saw just in your recent work that you describe how the concentration of decision-making power can reshape an entire public sphere. What does it teach us in the era where private platforms or also private corporates, or even, you just heard a name, increasingly influence democratic discourse in this aspect?
Can you repeat the quote, please? Because I didn't get this question before, guys. I'm going to have to think about it on the spot. What quote is the paper from? What paper is the quote from?
I have to look it up again, but what I really found very interesting is that you were researching what private platforms will increasingly shape and have an influence on our democratic discourse. The exact quote I don't remember, but it was very fascinating. Maybe you can elaborate on your work, on your research that you find.
No, absolutely. That's an easy one. So, so I think this is something I have been thinking a lot lately because I'm a legal scholar, but a lot of my research is about platform regulation and platform governance. And I'm especially interested in the platforms that mediate our communications and their impact on our democratic practice, right? So I have written a lot. Sorry, it's because I speak so loud, I'm afraid I'm going to scream. It's because, so I have written a lot and read a lot about these mechanisms of influence over attention and communication fluxes online, right? So this has always been a strong concern in the field. We had this idea that the traditional media, the legacy media, has power over opinion because they have editorial power, because they had control over infrastructure. And once platforms became a widespread social political phenomenon, there have been other theoretical elaborations of this capacity to influence public discourse. And my favorite one is by Natalie Helberger. She'll talk about systemic power over opinion, which is not about choosing the content or producing the content, but about influencing the information and attention fluxes online through basically systems architecture, right? But now with AI and Gen AI, I do wonder a lot the extent to which we can still use the same frameworks that we were using. I can absolutely see how we talk about a systemic relevance for how communications will be potentially altered, especially since these services are increasingly penetrating different dimensions of society. But at the same time, a lot of the research on platforms has learned empirically that the way people perceive, receive, and process information online is so much about the interpersonal relationships that they develop with the other people that they're communicating with, right? So for instance, this information is about not necessarily believe false news, but it's mostly about showing political identity. Or, for instance, the filter bubble and echo chamber theories fell down because research found out that people actually have relationships online that are not only about political identity, but also about affection. So they were inevitably eventually in touch with other visions, even though they did not necessarily want to. But now that what we have as relevant part of the public sphere is Gen AI, is a system where this systemic level of collectiveness is no longer involves the other, but involves a database that is controlled by a powerful company. I do wonder a lot the extent to which these frameworks that I have used in the past will help me figure out how to deal with this new level of democratic discourse, right? Where the relationship to the other is going to fade away. I'm sorry, it's not an answer.
No, that's exactly, I don't want to, I mean, we cannot go out with just easy answers. Otherwise, we have like already a solution on how to proceed. This is just a lively discussion, and I will also soon open now the floor for questions. But before this, maybe also to add on this point, because also in my work, I see that now in Europe, for example, there are a lot of incentives to have the entire value chain being built in Europe. And I'm wondering now on a question that is, does sovereignty comes at the expense of competitiveness? So many people think that you have to have everything on your own ground. For example, also Turkey, they're investing immense amount of money into building the entire value chain on their own land, but also different countries like for example, in Dubai or others, because they're saying you have to control everything. Maybe again, back to South Africa, what would AI sovereignty actually need to deliver for a community whose language is not represented in any major model?
I think I just want to piggyback off Clara, because sometimes we think about language as this one means of communication. But what Clara, I think, was referring to is the narrative, right? This is the most important. Who owns the narrative? Whose voice is being echoed in these private mediums? We are seeing how many hours people spend on social media or other forms of media. We are seeing how much erosion happens with traditional media. We are also seeing, languages, we can say this, right? Our languages are not represented. South Africa is a very special case, unlike the rest of Africa, because our languages, the major languages are part of our education. We have regulations. Post-94, we put a lot of emphasis on our languages. We also put a lot of emphasis on apparatus to make sure that we have democratized narratives. But what then happens now is that these language models are not only about language, but they model narratives. And we've seen Grok had to be shut down a number of times because of certain narratives it was pushing. We just saw another model being shut down, right, because of a certain narrative. So beyond language representation and whose language is it, we need to guard what is actually being echoed and amplified. Disinformation gets amplified because if you think about the monetization model of this platform is engaging you more and more. Now, in being enraged gets you engaged more and more than being happy, right? If you touch grass, you're happy. But if you get fed something that will rile you up and get you other people that get riled up with you, the social graph then grows. Now, what happens with the social graph when it moves into the real world? And we have done quite a number of studies on misinformation and disinformation and word vectors. I think you would know, JP. But the most important one that we did was COVID, right? The narrative. We found that what happens on social media was a direct reflection, right? We wanted to know whose narrative is being amplified. And we found that when people get interviewed by your CNN, your BBCs, for authority and authoritative voices for COVID, it was white men. And women would just be taken when we talk about caretaking and nursing, right? And this is just one use case of these models and what they amplify and the danger of these models and their impact in the real world, because now everyone is using these models as subject matter experts. So for me to be here, for instance, one would have to Google, okay, she has 5 million views and she talks about AI, okay, and then now we're not checking anything. Actually, we also now becoming like language models ourselves, right, in terms of how we process information. It's quite shallow how we fact check. You go there, you get it, and then this person becomes a subject matter expert. But now we have outsourced that, and by outsourcing that, we are also outsourcing our personhood, how we relate to the world around us, to each other, in our family. And I think JP also talked about all the psychosis beyond data annotation. South Africa is having a serious problem with AI psychosis around teenagers, where there's a blurred line with reality and the virtual world. So this is just beyond language, because outside of us getting more data sets, we also need to think about what that data set should reflect. So it's more ethical and inclusive.
Yeah, totally. And this, we're talking about all the different aspects, of course, also on the narrative, but also on the language. And I think this is also where your book and your research, JP, dives deeper in. Maybe you can highlight what's, maybe share your views on it and what's important in this discussion as well.
Yeah, so latching on that and also the talk about the narrative. So narrative is, so we have data, and narrative is a very human way of understanding the data. When you hear, if you criticize a new LLM model, it's the mantra from the Silicon Valley that as long as we have more data, when we have more data, when you have faster computers, that will be solved. That used to be their standard answer. The problem is they don't understand that, humans actually understand data in terms of narratives, a story. We have, discrete set of facts, and we try to find causal relationships or interesting connections. And those things are really important because it actually dictates how you think about the world, how we think about the world. And in a marketplace, an honest marketplace of ideas, those narratives have to maybe fight, to collaborate, to become like a better truth, right? But that is completely lost on those people. And merging that with sovereignty, I saw a very troubling trend among some people who actually do like the idea of sovereignty, because they took a weird idea of sovereignty, and this is what really happened. So I was talking to some people who say, well, this new Korean sovereign AI will solve all the problems. And of course, I don't really fall for that hype. But what kind of specific problem are you talking about? So there is this debate on this island between Korea and Japan and who owns the thing. Now, Korea says it's not even a debate because Korea actually has some forces on it. Japan says it's disputed, so that is a source of dispute. But of course, idea is, whatever position you're taking, you actually have to know the other side's argument. And if you think you're right, you have to hone your argument against the argument. But what this person said was, once we have a sovereign AI, not ChatGPT, which says there is a debate, this new Korean AI will just tell us the answer that we like, and we'll be happy. And this was not coming from just, this guy on the block. He was actually a professor of social geography. And he said, once that is there, we'll have the best AI. And I said, well, have you thought about this? And he actually was very shocked that there was some Korean who actually would contradict him. And this is actually pretty, very dangerous thing, because if even intellectuals have that kind of AI is the best because it will give us the answer as long as we have more data, and we can choose whatever data we want to train it with, then this is a huge problem. And the most important problem we can see from here is the loss of humanity, in the sense that AI is not this super intelligence that will give us the answers, but it's something that we make. We actually have to make it better as humans. So I think that was it.
That's a good point that you highlight here again. That's we definitely should not always trust the AI we are using, or the people who are saying that AI will solve this problem. Then, Clara, I want to now move back to the term democratic sovereignty, and a rather provocative question on us humans and what control we have in this AI sovereignty or digital sovereignty field. And can a society really be sovereign if citizens have no meaningful way to influence or challenge the AI systems they use? And what institutions would need to make this possible?
The short answer is no. But to develop a bit more, I think Francesca already hinted at that, about the importance of finding mechanisms of contestation of AI systems. It was a very good presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. There's something that I think is concerning, which is, of course, we tend to think about regulatory authority, right? Like, what should be the regulatory body, the state body that would be responsible for regulating this sector? We need laws, we need enforcement, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, this concentration of power that comes with technological infrastructure is increasingly hybrid. So we have not only private companies and private infrastructure that exert public functions because people depend on them, or because now they bear a lot of the democratic discourse, so they can also co-shape democratic transformation, political transformation. But at the same time, they are increasingly infiltrating the public sector, right? We all might have heard already of Palantir, which is this company that increasingly provides surveillance and law enforcement technologies to different countries around the world through public procurement. So what I want to say here is that it becomes harder and harder to place regulatory authority in or outside of the state when this concentration of power is so hybrid, right? And this dominant infrastructure becomes so omnipresent. So I do believe a lot in decentering and deconcentrating forms of governance. I think our keynote, we also learned about that a little bit. Even though I think our regulatory frameworks are still very much working within power and not challenging it. So, for instance, the DSA, I think, takes a step towards that. The Digital Services Act regulates platforms in Europe, and it has this enforcement structure that is about an European board, that is about regulatory agencies, national regulatory agencies, but it's also about out-of-court dispute settlements. It's also about independent audits, which we know will be the 4 same companies that do them all around the world, but anyway. It's also about fostering these other levels where decisions about content moderation can be contested. And the thing is, we already have a lot of work on alternative models of data governance that are not focused on how one corporation is governing data, but how to distribute different functions in data governance amongst different actors. So if I had to throw hope in some direction right now for democratic accountability, I would throw hope towards finding new institutional arrangements where control and governance of data, of digital infrastructure is actually deconcentrated.
Deconcentrated and decentralized, meaning in open source technology, for example? Or how
Yeah, that too, but I'm also thinking about technology that is not necessarily open source. I mean, of course we need open source, of course we need public models, right, public alternatives. That's also a debate that is overdue. But I'm also thinking about forms of governance even provided by regulation that include other people to dispute even what happens within private companies and what happens within private digital infrastructure.
Totally. Maybe JP, how is South Korea dealing with this? How is South Korea dealing with this issue and also with the issue of decentralizing the power?
Yeah, the decentralizing, if we go back to the Korea's AI law, it actually the opposite of decentralizing. It actually centralized AI decision-making into this one commission. And in the law, it says it's not subject to outside monitoring. It actually has all this power. And so, yeah, worryingly, it's actually going in the wrong direction. And it also reminds me that, okay, it's systematically bad, but again, in the real world, you can have the best ideal institution and systems, but if the people running it are not really trying to enforce it, then, you know, those things don't really kind of work. And one example, I was thinking that, so as far as those countries go, I'm kind of more familiar with the US, Britain, and Korea. So I maybe come to those, going back to those equations. So sometimes wonder, okay, so we have all those problems, all those philosophical problems, you know, what the data mean, if that's from the scientific perspective, all those economic, environmental perspectives of all those, you know, bad effects. Why are the governments not doing anything? The reason is because right now, those AI proponents, more in general, technological proponents from Silicon Valley, are actually both in the governments in terms of the think tanks and also politicians themselves. For one example is, this is just a fact, so I'll just state it. So J.D. Vance, the vice president of the US, he actually once worked for Peter Thiel. Okay, so Peter Thiel, you know, this is maker of PayPal, but who really had a hard time stating on video whether the humanity deserved to live. Okay? Now, to him, it seems like a rational decision because he comes from this, you can call it a school of thought, that everything can be computed. So he did a computation, and maybe he decided that humans don't deserve to live. So he was saying something that was rational to him. And that kind of person employed that person is in the White House now. And you can make the connection that, okay, as long as he didn't really renounce his enunciation with Peter Thiel, which he hasn't, then I think it's not a huge leap of logic that, yes, those thoughts are actually prevalent in the governments. And also in Korea, this was one executive from one of the largest IT companies, and he alone was responsible for allotting about 60 billion euros in AI projects, and that was one person. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised if he has very similar ways of thinking, that everything is numerical and technology actually surpass all the others' importance.
Yes, definitely. I think Clara wants to add something on this.
Yes, that's a really good point. And I would just add that we also are running this risk in academia, absolutely, because we see an increasing tendency to value quantification and quantified methods over qualitative methods, over conceptual theoretical research. We now, when you go to a conference about democracy and you see all this quantified research on, political tendencies and who you voted for and who you didn't vote for and who you're in touch with on Facebook and who you're not, which I think is, of course, very important, and very enlightening empirical evidence. But at the same time, I am very worried with the extent to which we now are relying on a profound quantification of our social political relationships and constantly overlooking, right, the critical, the ethical implications. Even if quantified decisions were better, do we really want them for all the decisions that we need to make as a society, right? Doesn't a lot of what we decide or how we are built come from being confronted with the other? And we can't just boil political decisions down to numbers, not all of them at least, right? So that's a very good point, JP. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yes, I totally agree. I really like also the dynamics that I think this is an issue that we are facing right now, because somehow pace and the technological innovation that I also drawn at the beginning of the moderation of the conference is something that is measured. So how fast you develop is kind of your money in a way. So who gets the fastest, the best models? We were talking a lot about Western economies, but also now, for example, when we go broader and also look at the other side, for example, we saw South Korea, but also in China, that the dynamics are shifting into more who gets the best and fast AI. And there's even a term, or maybe a phrase, who owns the technological power has the most power. Maybe I get your view on this from all of you. Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
I mean, one of the interesting things is we also now treat US and China like they have the same strategy. And they don't, right? If you see the China ways is heavily embedded on embedded hardware and infrastructure. And it's more of a central vision that speaks to the developmental goals. The US one is more individualized, and this is why there's this race of who is the better model, who is the better model. China's not coming and saying this is the better model, right? They're not shooting that horn. They have a different story. And the reason in the US, and maybe because it's a society, and this is why in our workshops we had to sit down and think about what is the right framework for Africa. Because our workshop actually had around 5 African countries represented across all African corridors. And we had to think about, okay, the Silicon Valley way does not work because we are not a capitalist continent or a capitalist nation. So this race doesn't work for us. And more or less, when is it innovation or where is the strategic digital advertising and marketing? Because how we also view AI, we really also need to, and I think I saw Franziska was saying like the German workshop was thinking about AI literacy. We really need to really think about how we position AI, because what the hyperscalers are telling people and what is really the truth is very different, right? And what hyperscalers are exposing, right, from infancy, 2-month-olds are watching weird things on YouTube, right? And AI-driven, no education, nothing, to 8-year-olds who are doing deepfakes of mermaids swimming for a certain narrative. So we need to think about all this holistically. And the American way, I am not convinced that there's fastest computing. This is all about breaking in, selling, and going public and making money. And all this is based on marketing gimmicks. Personally, that $1 trillion US story, I don't buy it. And because of this story is also being sold to us in Africa, we are trying to leapfrog, right? We are trying to leapfrog. We are really trying to catch up. And because we can't catch up, we just start buying and buying and buying and buying and buying. And our sovereignty, for instance, in a lot of our nations is more on the procurement. We are now heavily indebted to this. We owe them a lot of money, right? Because we took, we don't know how to pay them, we don't even know how these things work. And that whole kind of, that narrative also has to be seen. And we talk about these two countries as if they're equals, because I think one wants to be seen as equal to another. But the fact is they're not equal, and they're never equal, because there are two different ideologies, two different mandates, and they all have two different sets. Peter Thiel is not thinking about the development of America. He's thinking about the development and the power of his company. And that is a fact. He's not thinking about the greater good of humanity. And to your point, when we talk about this, who owns the voice, if someone like that has that much power with that ideology, and it is their private platform that has a larger market, then you can see the ideas that will then go told and told and told again until everyone starts to believe it. And we are seeing it now, because we all now think that all these technologies, people are like, in South Africa, people are saying that they use ChatGPT as a psychologist now, right? People are using it to write essays, right? No, we are going to replace psychologists. You can't replace a psychologist. You can't replace a maths lecturer. And to the last point, one of the things that we talked about is that there's a reason we don't give calculators to 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 5-year-olds. We expect them to have a certain level of mental maturity and a grasp of arithmetic before we give them calculators. And also, this is how we should also think about AI literacy for our kids. And right. And I think anyone can Google how the Montessori tried to sue one of those founders who tried to open up his own Montessori with his own friends and his own kids, and no access to the internet when everyone else's kids has access to their technologies.
Yes, couldn't have said it better. Maybe JP, your view on this question that Mo already answered a little bit. Maybe on South Korea, we're not seeing this as a race between the US and China, for example, but really going into your country and how your country is dealing on prospective solutions when it comes to ever fast technology and innovations.
Yeah, so as far as the sort of the model goes, we already know that. So the government actually did a competition to make this sovereign AI. So you had like 5 or 6 companies compete for this, to make this one Korean AI. I don't know, whatever that means. But it was telling that on the first round, the biggest IT company dropped out by cheating intentionally. So they couldn't reapply even after political pressure, because they realized that in terms of scale, you cannot really hope to catch up with China or the US, whatever the model is. So it's actually how you use it. So that's the realistic goal. But I also want to latch on to that point of actually, effect on children as well. I think it actually goes to what kind of human problems we're trying to solve with the AI, because that is important. Because if you are kind of only focused on the speed of doing the same thing, I don't think it's really solving the real human problems, right? So when I say those things, some people think I just hate AI. No, I don't, because I really think it's a good, technology if it's used well. One of the most optimal or good things people say is it's really good at pattern and recognition. So there are a lot of so far undeciphered historical documents and things, and also disappearing languages. And for those purposes, the current machine learning and AI really excel, because it can really detect meaningful or potentially meaningful patterns much faster than humans. But the problem then again is, from a cultural perspective, that is a really worthy goal, right? So disappearing languages or documents from 1,000 years ago, which should be really interesting. But then again, when it matches with the scaling, it cannot compete financially, right? So you spend those, I guess we are now talking about $1 trillion as if it's just $1 million now. But then again, you can't really justify to those people that, hey, it's worth spending $1 trillion on deciphering these historical documents. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a huge problem. So there are where, from a human's perspective, where the real values are. But then again, the way the AI is developing is such that those things really look very unimportant. And that is a huge problem we have to get to.
Exactly. It's those looking unimportant points which actually make this difference, and also why we are here sitting. Before I give Clara also the question or the stage, I want to now look into the room and already inviting you in thinking about a reflection or question. You can take your time. I will now ask Clara my question, and then I will look into the room and, of course, invite your questions. So, Clara, on your legal research on it, again, on the topic of faster pace and scale of AI and of technology as such, how can we keep up with regulation if it is built not for so much fast involvement of technology?
That's a classic problem in regulatory theory. There's been a lot of theorization of what this is called, the pacing problem, the Collingridge dilemma, all of it, do we regulate sooner and we possibly harm innovation, or do we wait and then the technology is consolidated and then you can't regulate it anymore? I don't know. This doesn't move me anymore. This debate doesn't move me anymore. Right now, I'm really focused on other things. I think what I'm focused now on is survival, in the sense that I have an understanding of the law that is not so much about when or how, or which I've done for a long time. It's super important. But I'm basically, the law is just a space of contestation, right? I'm becoming more agonistic with time, I think. So we all say, so freedom of expression and digital sovereignty, this should definitely be a value of digital technologies. But then what does it mean is a whole different question. And this question is going to be disputed, on a day-to-day basis. So what I'm looking at now is how are these disputes happening with what we have? Right? So here in Europe and in Germany, you have the DSA, you have problems in the DSA, you have potentials in the DSA, and now this dispute to interpret what a systemic risk to civic discourse is, what a systemic risk to gender violence is. And now it's time for us to sit and study and see and try to understand who are the people who are determining what a risk to democracy is and what it isn't, right? And shed light on that. One thing that I'm always torn about is, you guys remember when X launched Grok, and Grok started nudifying women and children, right? If that's not a systemic risk to fundamental rights, I don't know what is. And yet, nobody used this provision of the DSA to say, take it down, pay a fine, So what I'm trying to say is whatever regulation you have, we have to dispute it, you know, and use it and interpret it. It's similar. You looked at the clock. I'm gonna. Okay.
No. We still have plenty of time.
It's kind of similar in Brazil, right? And this is a very good point to compare, because there what we have is different in the sense that we are unable to approve regulation. Forget about it. There's a lot of debate, there's a lot of proposal. The whole rights thing that I spoke about in the beginning, I learned from the Brazilian experience. So much interesting stuff. Nothing will pass. Lobby is super strong, right? And it's with far-right parties, so you won't. Like all regulatory attempts to go through, they don't pass Congress. So what do you have now? You have the judiciary taking like a prominent role in, I'm not going to say regulating because the judiciary is not supposed to regulate, but in trying to contain big tech power through what looks, let's say, unconventional, right? But what I mean is you have this institutional movement now to try to make sense and interpret what we have in order to show some resistance, some democratic resilience towards this increasing concentration of power, right? So in a very different context, you also see this movement of what is it that we have, where can we incide, and where can we dispute these narratives that are in regulation, or sometimes they're not even there, right? So I think that's also not an answer, Dylan, to your question, but it's
I love it. I mean, that's why we are here. We are not here for easy solutions or easy answers, easy questions. This is why you made it to this room. What I really also like how all three of you, directly also now to the theme of our conference, it's power. Power is on us. Power is on us people wanting to dispute, wanting to challenge the status quo. So now I want to give the floor to the audience. We again have several mics here. And who wants to be the first person? Francesca in the beginning, yes.
Oh. Yeah, that was...
Maybe somebody there.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Now I see lots of hands, raising hands. Thanks, Francesca, also.
Thank you, folks. This was such a fabulous panel.
Exactly. Yeah.
Clara, could you continue your thought? I really, really like this idea that you said of trying to curtail technological power through disputing it via law. And you also brought up the paradox of that. They are strong lobbies. So how do you see this play out, given also, and I hesitate to use the word urgency, but there is a sense of urgency, right?
I see it with a lot of concern. I'm very worried, but I don't see an option that is not disputing and interpreting what is it that we have, right? So I think it's more important than ever that we advocate for new regulatory approaches, whatever it is we think we need to, but where we also try to move within the institutional possibilities, right? So the Brazilian scenario, this thing with courts being at the forefront of fighting disinformation, being at the forefront of holding big tech accountable, is this idea? No. It's not what courts were meant to do, right? They're selective. They don't act spontaneously. They need to be provoked. There's already a problem of access there. Like they will only provide a right or grant a right if you provoke them. So if you're a person that doesn't have the means to provoke a court for whatever reason, you won't, you know? So that's to begin with a very big limitation. And yet, contestation has to find a way, right? And here in Europe and in Germany, it's a privileged place to do that because I think I'm not like an international relations scholar or anything, but I do think that this is the one place where political will managed to outweigh lobby and approve regulation with all its limitations, regulation that can actually do something. So I'm all for, let's use this, you know, how can we use it, right? That's where my frustration with the Grok thing comes from. Like, how could you not use it? Like, yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't have much more. I think it's, yeah.
I think it's greatly already what you're saying, and especially in this kind of EU German context, because I'm a big believer that the middle powers of Europe and UK are perhaps one of the strongest barriers to what is upcoming. And so, yeah, this is a very good point for all of you here who can, you know.
Yeah. One thing, like I said, I'm super worried, but just not be completely pessimistic. I read this book by Steve Hahn called Illiberal America. It's about the US. Sorry, guys. Just kidding. It's fine that it's about the US. But it's basically, because when you use illiberalism, talk about this recent democratic decay and this kind of things, a lot of people will tell you, but liberalism has always been flawed, has always been excluded. Women couldn't vote. They went to the guillotine. Anyway, yeah. So it's true, like liberalism has always been flawed and etc. But one thing that I like about this book is that it's not disputing this. It's basically saying that it's not about you either have liberalism or illiberalism, right? These are not opposing things. It's just two different tendencies that coexist. And then the point that he makes in the beginning of the book is, of course, America has always been illiberal in that it's been excludent and discriminatory and etc. But it was also a place for huge liberal conquests, like civil rights movements, you know, black resistance and everything. So the point here is that these things come at the same time, right? So now I'm super concerned, I'm super worried, but I know that there are also good things and resistance happening at the same time, you know? So that's where I try to shift when I'm feeling very down. Yeah.
Very good approach. Thank you. Second row. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the debate. I would like to pose a question that puts the whole AI's or digital sovereignty debate into a more geopolitical debate. Because especially in Europe, but also all over the world, we used economic cooperation also as building dependencies for peace. So to what extent is also this move into we all want to be digitally sovereign now, again also a move to maybe have more friction in the geopolitical space and maybe a bad signal for future peace?
I think you have probably seen recent, in the past 12 months, the tensions between South Africa and the US. And what you're saying is correct, right? At which point do we resist without being shut down? And being shut down means that can we even afford to be shut down, right? If we resist and say, okay, if you want to come to us, then we accept this kind of data to be in this infrastructure. This is the model that we use in this country. At which point can we afford to be shut down? Now, unfortunately for the Global South, it's not as easy, right? Because beyond geopolitics, it's like a lot in this room, you find this hyperscaler and a foundation tied to this hyperscaler and a trust tied to the hyperscaler, and those seemingly non-biased, impartial bodies, however, come with an agenda to pump research and development funding that speaks to the father body, right? And the father body now also has to account to the country of origin. And when the country of origin has a tension with us, for instance, it becomes very difficult to negotiate. And therefore, this is why at our workshop we had this Ubuntu framework, because we are very aware that Africa, in a way that Germany can digitally liberate themselves, we cannot. We cannot negotiate as the EU can negotiate, and that is a fact. So we need a framework that says this is where we are, this is who the global powers are, how do we interact and work with you guys, but ensure that we still safeguard the most basic and important part of our digital infrastructure, digital data sets, whether it's a model, whether it's the cloud infrastructure, and basically there is a point, right? We cannot enter negotiations as the EU or as Asia because geopolitics is also quite important. I mean, we have been threatened for quite some time in the past 12 to 18 months, and yeah.
Yeah, so on that question, so I'm not an expert on international economics, so I can't really say that, but I would guess that it is sort of this parallel to this question of whether multinational corporations do help global understanding or not. For instance, like McDonald's, you know, they're the symbol of sort of this one giant unifying thing that actually could destroy cultural diversity. But then again, I have this personal experience. If you travel to a place remote from your country, and you feel lost, and you find McDonald's, and suddenly this feeling of comfort comes to you. So I do understand that, but I would like to focus on, global peace. I would like to talk a little bit about communication between different cultures and people. And I want to specifically, because I had the experience, focus on the issue of translation. So I think it's related, right? Because, peace is through communication. So whenever those companies gives out a list of jobs that will be replaced by computers, translators, interpreters, always number one. But it also shows that those people don't really understand what translation is. It's not word to word, it's from person to person, and the word is just a tool. And there's this great Korean English translator called Deborah Smith, and she said, sometimes for good communication, mistranslation is a choice, right? Because, just Mamma Mia is not translated to mother in Korea, right? It depends on all the context and what Koreans would say in similar context, right? And that was the things that, those tech people don't understand what people actually really do. But hopefully I did hear that now there's people who employ translators who then fire them are hiring back because the machine translations, the customers don't like it. So again, the economy actually plays an important part. But the good thing is that I guess more people are understanding that computers are not humans, and just what we read are not what people think, right? Because we have the experience, right? When we have to utter one word, people say we have 3 thoughts. But computers don't catch that because they see that one word and that's the entire human psyche, or the humans it's not. So I think in that sense, if communication is important for world peace, if I want to make the connection, then still the human element is paramount. That's what I would say.
Beautifully said. Okay, then Francesca, it's your turn. Okay.
Thank you. This is with reference to what you explained about the new law in Korea that it's being called promotion and regulation of AI at the same time, but you also said that centralizing power in terms of who gets to decide. Right. And we do see the similar patterns across many other countries of the world. And the panel has already highlighted that, China is about, more centralizing power in the state. US is about less and less regulation so that market benefits. And EU is about focusing more on how, more and more power can you give in the hands of people. But in that context, and when you talked about Korea, I was also thinking about, this is also said about Brazil, and we have experts and they can verify here, is that the other economies in the world, they tend to fall into the trap of, be like US, make more and more possibility of making money out of it, but at the same time look like EU, giving some powers in the hand of people, some rights, and then act like China to some extent, giving more power to the state or exemptions to the state in terms of being able to control, which, these are 3 distinct philosophies of, how are you trying to locate the problem or solve it. But when you go into the other economies, then deal with the problem of it, do you think they fall into this trap? Because this, this panel says whose sovereignty, and the sovereignty question in this digital space came after the debate on digital colonialism, that there's some form of dependencies that is coming, and we need sovereignty. And how do we claim it? Through probably techno-nationalism, because nationalism was the response to historical colonialism, the history that we have. And we see this word being used across India, Brazil, South Africa, and other countries and all. So, but then what do you place in this techno-nationalism when you get confused or trapped among, three distinct philosophies?
Yeah, so I was listening to a question. I think there was a weird convergence of the three philosophies, right? So recently, because this Fable 5 came out, and then a couple of days later, the government said this cannot be used by non-US citizens. So even though we might say US has no regulation, but now that is the stark example of centralization. So I think in this age, we have no rules on how to compete fairly. We actually have no understanding of what the nature of the technology is. I think people are just taking whatever they want and then just running with it, right? So if I can, dominate you with the speed by deregulating, I'll do it. And then at the last moment, I won't let you use it. So I think even those, these countries and those the unions are not really setting an example of how to do it properly. And it's actually, my question is, so what kind of shape will it be? But then again, all those problems, are they being solved? That's a big question as well. So I don't have a clear answer, but I'm kind of sensing that there's something to be really looked at seriously in that direction.
Can I add?
Yes.
It seems for me, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think this conversation was had in the 50s, right? At the dawn of the term AI. And everyone was like, yay, the silver bullet is going to solve everyone's going to be replaced. And then, machine translation, importantly, was the first thing that came out of those AI tools. And then when people realized, and research realized that actually AGI is not possible, everyone went back to the original foundations of just operational efficiency. And what that means is that what is my problem? Identify the problem, and how can tech, and AI also is a term that I really don't like using because it's such a weird term to use, right? Because it makes...
It's not intelligence.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. It's weird. It's a weird term, but I think it's good to market. So once you can map out a use case by use case, then the systems make sense. But the past 3 years has been a very boom of this, having this computer that can do everything and replace humans and translators and linguists, and humanities is obsolete. Everything is obsolete. We're going to get doctors from these robots, and then, there were studies that were saying, people don't need to get married. They're going to get robots as women, as that was supposed to happen 5 years ago. So all this, when we talk about, honestly, I always go back to literacy. It's something that people are not aware of, that this is not new. Right? Every 10 years, there's always this leap. Before ChatGPT, there was Eliza. Eliza had the same problems. People started assuming Eliza was a human therapist, right? The ethics came at that time in the 80s. We're still talking about ethics in 2026. And I really am more appreciative of Clara's way of this contestation, because I think what can change the course of history now is this contestation, and having to say that, if what Grok was doing happened on TV, we knew who to go to and who to sue and who to hold accountable. So we need to find a way to do the same for these technologies, and maybe use case by use case is a much more better presentation, because it would fit directly into how our democracies are built. So South Africa is built, we have the broadcaster, we have telecommunications. So if we can find a way to get each and every one of those accountables for the mistakes that happen in their field, is a much more realistic way of this contestation. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Also, I like the approach of doing it step by step, use case by use case, and that's why it's so valuable to have different perspectives here so we can learn from each other. I saw now 2 remaining questions, one from you and one also from you. Then stage is yours. Yes.
Maybe we can pose both and then you can answer it.
First of all, thank you. This was a very lively and interesting discussion. I want to zoom out a little bit because the title is also Whose Sovereignty? And I'm wondering, is sovereignty the right concept to think about? If not, could we use it, like thinking outside the box, like Sita told us in her keynote, to use sovereignty as a concept and to make like shared sovereignty, or I don't know, to rewrite it somehow, or to leave it be and to leave it be to other people then.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this fascinating debate, and just one question: does the notion of digital human rights play a role here? Was sort of the term didn't pop up in the discussion, but maybe this is actually what we should be thinking about. But sort of what's the goal? So much that I appreciate your insistence on implementation, also that, and also this step-by-step approach. But at the same time, shouldn't we have a notion of sort of how we want to live, and shouldn't that be somehow translate itself into digital human rights, for example?
Thank you both. I mean, this very good ending questions on zooming out now. Who wants to start with questions here? Clara?
I can, because I love both these questions, and I promise to be brief. So starting with the last one, I think we absolutely need to have a discussion on the scope of our rights. There's this big discussion in law of like, do our human rights change or do they stay the same? Even like theoretical classic typologies will classify human rights according to generations. So there is this inherent idea that new social-political phenomenon shows us other saliences that we didn't see before, and then we need new rights. So there's a lot of this discussion, and it's also like, I'm not super, there isn't. I'm more into like, okay, what is the digital phenomenon showing us that we haven't been able to name yet with the language of rights? Right? So I think this is also a super important discussion. I think it happens a lot. For instance, you see a lot of scholars that try to extract a right to encryption from the idea of privacy, from the idea of data protection, right? You see, especially in the US, that has a more libertarian approach to freedom of speech, a tendency to try to understand now what a collective approach to freedom of speech would look like. Other countries already know that, but the US, So I think this discussion of how the scope of rights change is also super important, and we need to keep having them. And that's why I think that the AI regulation that completely overlooks this is missing a big opportunity to give people an epistemic basis to dispute the systems. Because when you say you have a right to contestation, you have a right to be notified, you have a right to be informed if you're being affected by an AI system, you have a right to challenge this decision if it affects your employability, for instance, then you give people an epistemic base to dispute the systems, right? So I think this is super important. And digital sovereignty, the WCB had a seminar this week called Sovereignty Exhaustion, as in like, oh my God, nobody can take this sovereignty thing anymore. I think the problem is that the most successful versions of digital sovereignty are basically about national industry, right? And that's the problem, because in itself, digital sovereignty has multidimensional meanings. It's also about bottom-up resistance. It's also about personal, your own individual autonomy over your information. There's very interesting dimensions of self-determination that are included in this concept. They're just not successful in policy, or at least in policy discourses, right? So I think it has potential, and I would like to keep raising attention to the need to stir other versions of digital sovereignty as well. Is this my last intervention?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I just want to say thank you so much. It's been very nice.
Thank you for the kind words. Yes. Do you also want to add on the question?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I don't think this was what was originally intended when they talked about AI sovereignty. It was more like a national bent. But whenever I hear about it, I just think about this sort of sovereign personhood. It's in like, I'm my own person. I think that's the most important thing, because that is being lost when we say, you know, AI has the answers, we only have to ask. And it's actually a pretty big problem because, so I'm interested in education, and I think it was the CEO of Palantir or somebody else, they all sound so interchangeable, said, well, the future generation has to learn how to ask the right questions. It sounds empowering, but it's actually very discouraging because it just reinforces the notion that they have all the answers. It actually makes you very dependent. You actually have to be able to find your own answers to at least understand or critically look at the answers that they give you. And I think also connects to human rights, because when we say human rights, it's like individual empowerment, right? I have my own rights, I have my own thoughts, but actually that's being taken away. And definitely, and a lot of people are actually discouraged. They actually feel enervated, meaning that they think that the LLMs have all the answers. But I can tell you that the AI or the current, because of those deficiencies in the algorithm, also in the data, right? I told you that data doesn't represent all the human knowledge. They don't have any claim to be the sole possessors of any truth. Okay, so don't just believe that AI has all the answers that are better than you. And trust me, I know this because I am a physicist. I just wanted to say that, so thank you.
Thank you, JP. And maybe
No,
the
thank
last
you. I think I've also, I mean, Clara has given me a much more interesting idea with contestation, because I've now viewing it as actively putting this human rights in motion, right? The right to privacy, the right to healthcare, the right to representation. And once we view human rights, we don't even have to think about the digital side of it. Because by leaking my information on a digital space, and my right of privacy is already infringed on, that is something I can go and say, this is unacceptable. By Grog doing what it did with undressing, with kids on that platform, that in it itself, you know, the right of protection fell off. That was child endangerment. You know, there's a lot of other laws. And sometimes I think we should not maybe run the race of changing all laws to fit AI. But we should look at how agile and how, you know, in motion our laws can be to broaden our net. Because once we start to pinpoint, this race is going to always be ahead of us, right? If we pinpoint, okay, they need to stop undressing, then it gets shut down, and then after 2 months, something else happens. Our messages are leaked. After something else, you know, there's some glasses that are now getting into the market that undress us, but we shut down GOG, we didn't shut down this. But what we see, once we see human rights in their entirety, it becomes much more easier to contest the infringements that happen in the digital world. So yeah, that is my parting shot. Thanks.
Thank you, all of three, but also the audience. I think it's very fascinating. We only talked 90 minutes now, and we navigated through different holistically perspectives of sovereignty, because there's no one lens on it. That's why really thankful to having 5 different countries now here represented on this stage, and many more here in the audience and also online. I really want to end with a quote by you just mentioned, Po. The more the world changes, the more it stays the same. So with this note, I want to end this closing panel today, and want to thank all of you for just sharing your insightful views here on stage. Thank you. Does my mic work now? Yeah, perfect. Okay. I see already people moving. That's a good sign. You can still stay here if you want and listen. But I know that you are very wanting to act already. So we have 4 different workshops now in different rooms, and one workshop, it is workshop C, stays here in this room. And I think the rest already knows where to go. We have on 3rd floor 2 rooms, and on the 4th floor 1. Where you can find it is exactly outside on the screens, and you can also look to find your regional inputs or facilitator of your session. Enjoy.